Right now, we'd like to introduce our speaker today and presenter, Dr. Martin from Kaiser University Graduate School of Education. Today's webinar will be focusing on classroom strategies to promote student, social, and emotional learning.
Thank you. I am Diana Martin, and I'm excited and glad to meet you and share some ideas about building classroom environments that encourage students to happily learn. All right, there are three things we'll cover in today's program. Hold on just a second. The first has to do, we'll talk about what is social and emotional learning. The second one is what you can do. And the last one is how you can get some help in doing this. This slide talks about what the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning defines as this topic. And this is a consortium. A number of universities are members of it. There is a slide at the end of these PowerPoints on the reference list that can take you to that site. But the three things are, in my words, to help prevent meltdowns, help students prevent their own meltdowns, to provide information about positive relationships, social relationships by the students, and to help students figure out that their emotions are not the boss, they are the boss. Some of these things may be intuitive to you, but there's also research to back them. There was a study done, a meta-study, so it was a study of studies, of 213 different empirical research studies of almost 300,000 K through 12 students, almost 300,000 K through 12 students. And what they learned from these studies are that if we can teach social emotional learning, it improves the behavior in the classroom, which you might have figured out. It also increases the self-confidence of the students, which that enhances self-efficacy. If students think they can do better, oftentimes they do. This was a huge study, and yet there was an 11% increase of those students on their standardized test scores. And they also demonstrated better attitudes about school. What this means is when social emotional learning is taught, teachers can help students reduce their aggressive behaviors, reduce their emotional distress, and eliminate or at least make fewer the number of conduct problems in the class. And I promise I'm going to get through with the research in just a minute. I just want to give you the basis that this is more than what looks like it would work. It actually is tested information about what works. So social emotional learning, according to a study done by Norris, actually reduced the negative interactions in the classroom and increased the measurable academic achievement of students. So some great goals there. And here's the study itself. This is what happened with the 270,034 K through 12 students. When these programs were used in, when these programs were used in the schools along with skills instruction, in other words, I'll show you in a moment how you can do this yourself. There was a 22% increase in the measurable emotional learning, 9% increase in the attitudes, but there were also increases in academic achievement and pro-social behavior, meaning they not only got along with others, but tried to help their peers get along with one another. And there was percentages that decreases in conduct problems and emotional distress. Just a bit more research and then we'll get into how you do it. So there are 3 studies here, they're all listed at the end, but one showed that it has the impact to increase and improve academic success. A second showed that it helps improve teacher evaluations. Now, why are teacher evaluations important? Well, we can't always tell easily how attitudes improve, and it's not always easy to measure how behavior improves, but researchers trust teachers' perceptions of improvement. So the middle study there showed that teachers said that after their students develop better social emotional learning skills, their conduct, their interactions, their achievement improved in the classroom. And there was actually, the last study, the one on the right, there was an 11 percentile point. That's out of 100, so that's a pretty significant increase in their academics compared to the peers who had not undergone the training. So let's talk about what this means in terms of real life application. There is a National Center for Innovation in Education, and they've come up with these 3 foundational slides. And the first one is that caring, you probably know this, caring relationships are the foundation of all lasting learning. I am guessing that none of us got into education for the money. Most of you are here today because you've made education your life's work and you're trying to help other people. The good news is this is demonstrated in results, that students that feel that they're in a caring relationship do better not only in the immediate relationship, but in their long-last learning. All of us can think of teachers that made a difference. This study shows that that difference is measurable. The second one, again, this may seem obvious to you. Emotions affect how and what we learn. Now, this is not just special needs students. This is all students, including us. So you may remember Skinner, the man with the rats, and classical conditioning. And when you reward something, the behavior is repeated. And a man named Thorndike also said that if a behavior is reinforced, it happens again. Well, one kind of classical conditioning reinforcement is good feelings. If students feel good and positive when they're in a classroom, they will repeat the behaviors that made them feel good and positive. So emotions not just affectively affect how we learn, but directly affect how all learners learn. And the third one, is that if we can help students create their own goals, that this demonstrates that they are more successful in the classroom. How do they create their own goals? Well, the first thing they start with is self-awareness. Do they know who they are and what they want? Now, you may wonder what this slide has to do with social emotional learning. I have to share with you, when my youngest daughter was home, she's now in graduate school, when she was home from college one term, she got me hooked on the Big Bang Theory. I don't know if any of you watched the Big Bang Theory, and it's going off the air anyway, but let's see. There are a number of characters, and most of them are intellectual giants, except for the young woman in the middle, who is Penny. And of the characters who are very brilliant and are, ironically, college professors, like yours truly, they are intelligent, but their social skills are not good. They don't know how to act. So in one of the scenes, Sheldon, the man in the green t-shirt there, who is especially brilliant, is trying to teach Penny how to the basics of quantum physics, I think is what it was. And she wanted to learn this so she could impress her boyfriend. And she couldn't learn it. So she started crying. And Sheldon says, "Penny, why are you crying?" And Penny, sobbing, says, "Because I'm stupid." And Sheldon very reasonably says, "That's no reason to cry. One cries because one is sad. For example, I cry because others are stupid, and that makes me sad." Sheldon was showing that he had a lack of social awareness, which is the part of this circle on the left that is in orange. So one of the things we develop with our students is trying to help them to learn how what we say makes other people feel. He's also very self-centered, which is also characteristic of students that don't have good social emotional learning. This grid here shows the 5 things that when we're dealing with social emotional learning, we try to teach. So starting from the left top, self-management is managing emotions and behaviors to achieve one's goals. If you are working in the classroom with certain kinds of students, you can probably recall instances when a student did not control his or her emotions. In fact, some students are very unable to do this. And what we're going to talk about today are some tactics and strategies that you can use to help your students learn self-management. The next one, self-awareness, has to do with helping the students know about themselves, helping them to understand who they are, not their problems, but just understanding what their emotions are and how to work with those emotions. The responsible decision-making has to do with making decisions, more than ethical and constructive, because a lot of times our younger students are not there yet, but more how to figure out what to do. What do you do when you're hit with this situation? Literally walking the student through what actions they could take when they're approaching something that is new or different to them. Relationship building at the bottom has to do, as it sounds like, with working not only with individual relationships, but in teams, and interestingly enough, with conflict. Oftentimes, in fact, I can't think of an example now, we have conflict because of another person. And social awareness, the last one, has to do with empathy. So now we've defined what is meant by social and emotional learning. Let's talk about what you can do. Literally, what are some steps that you can do in the classroom when dealing with students that you want to help develop social and emotional learning? Many times these questions, just by asking them, even if the students don't have an answer, starts a process of self-awareness. So each of these questions has to do with the 5 components that are listed on that circle we talked about. So you have a student, and that student seems to be like Sheldon. It doesn't mean he doesn't have abilities or she doesn't have abilities. It means they don't know how to interact socially or emotionally with other people. So the first one, a question you can ask a student or class, is simply, what can you do well? And the emphasis there is you. What are you good at? And how can you tell you are good at this? Now, for those of you that have taken courses in education, you may be aware that this has to do with self-efficacy. If the student becomes aware of what she or he is good at, then that person will be able to use that force within them to drive them forward for motivation. The second thing in that circle, self-management. What can you ask a student to help them think about self-management? Well, one example could be asking them simply, how do you stay on track and finish your work? And what do you do when things don't go as expected? Now, my experience with this is sometimes the answer is very truthful, and the student will say, I don't know. I don't know what to do when they don't, or I don't care. Asking the question itself gets it started, and you may need a little guided thinking about, well, you just did a good job on this project. How did you finish that one? That kind of thing. Next, social awareness. Ask the students, how do you make sure you understand what others want to do in a group? I would guess in some cases the students have never thought of this question. So this is an example of just asking the question, and maybe coaching along will help. In a moment, I'm going to give you some examples of how you can do this in lesson plans too. Fourth, how do you show you are a good friend? Are you a good listener? And lastly, and this is the hard part for many of us, forget the children, so it's hard for all of us. If you have more than one choice, how do you decide the best thing to do? Well, you could write an entire book on that, but it is still good exercise to help the students progress in the way they think about what they're doing, because the first step is to get them thinking about it. Now, these slides are directly from the CASEL site. They're my interpretation of what it says on the CASEL site, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And it is on the final slide. The site is listed on the reference slide. So we've talked about social and emotional learning, and now we're talking about what teachers can do to teach it. So we covered the definition, and here's some ideas about ways to teach this in the classroom. The learning objectives on the left are actual learning objectives. So if you're needing to create a lesson plan about this, these and other objectives are available online, and also these are ones that I put together. So an example of a learning objective would be students will be able to, of course you would start with a situation, given whatever, students will be able to put themselves in another's shoes, see other people's point of view, understand the other person's thoughts, accurately interpret situation cues. So these obviously have to do with the empathy, social empathy. And what we're doing in these objectives is we're describing some of the things that people who are empathetic are able to do. How could you teach this? Well, here's some suggested activities. One thing you could do is teach a lesson, especially with the youngsters, meaning preschool and early childhood, or developmentally at those ages, why it's important to identify how others feel and what to look for. And some of you may know, this is also used on IQ tests sometimes, especially with children's IQ tests. So the last bullet there, you show a picture of someone, and the person may have a sad expression. In fact, what students usually recognize are sad, happy, and mad. Those are the three that are the easiest to recognize. And if they can't recognize those, you've got some work to do. But beyond that, there are more nuances. Is the person looking down? Is the person looking excited? What kinds of things can you help the students see in visuals, in pictures, that help identify what the individual, the character, is feeling? Now let's see, let me see if we have, I don't think we do. Do we have any questions so far? All right. I don't see anybody in the chat box, so I'm going to keep on going. Here's some more learning objectives and how you could put them to work. Initiate contact with others. Students will be able to initiate contact with others, share one's thoughts and feelings, express appreciation, give constructive feedback. That's pretty advanced, by the way. Establish and maintain rewarding connections, and recognize and respect boundaries. That last one is critical. If you can achieve that, your classroom will be a lot calmer place. So what are some things we can do in the classroom to do this? You can teach students how to meet someone new. And I remember when my daughters were young, I had a job that involved a lot more public relations than my job does now. And I remember teaching them each how to shake hands with someone, look that person in the eye and say, hello, my name is, or how do you do, which is kind of a dated expression now. It's amazing that our students and our children now often don't get those kinds of skills developed with them, partially because of the technology, and partially because we're all in a rush, and sometimes because the lessons are too advanced and they need us to slow down the lessons. How do you start a conversation? How do you end it? I remember when I first started texting, I had to learn how to end a texting conversation. I kept wanting to say goodbye or thanks or something, and gradually had to learn you don't really end those conversations. You can also use lesson plans that teach the importance of forgiveness, and in the literature discuss characters who learn to forgive. Now, in early childhood development courses, there are a lot of wonderful books that you can read to children about this subject. You can also do what we call with them play acting. You can actually have them act out ways that they could forgive someone that they're angry with. What do you say? It's that simple. What do you say and what do you do? Many of us grew up in families and environments where we learned all of these things by what Bandura called social learning, or learning through observation. And either because the students are not exposed to that, or because they did not pick up on it when they were exposed, you can underscore some of these skills by just showing them what to do. Now, we've talked about what some of the definitions are of social and emotional learning. And then the last few slides were about some of the things that you could do in the classroom or in counseling even, in working with these students. There is also a place for social emotional learning in the community. And this slide was provided by that Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and is used with permission. But for you to know, there are resources available online. This is one of the sources, also through the universities that are members of this collaborative effort, including things like handbooks, lesson plans, activities, all kinds of things available. So there in the center of the screen, you see the 5 characteristics that we teach in social and emotional learning: self-management, decision-making, relationship building, social awareness, and self-awareness. That starts, for us, it can start in the classroom. There are also school-wide initiatives that can be generating social emotional learning. And then outside of that, although this slide is a little bit less clear than I'd like it to be about homes and communities, because one of the things that we've learned is that social and emotional learning should or can, depending on where you are in your development, start at home. Now, if you're like me, sometimes thinking about getting parents involved is kind of frightening. You think they don't even have enough time now, the parents, to respond to certain things that I send home. But I have been impressed, and I hope you are too, that you may be surprised at the amount of dedication parents may have to helping out their child, especially if you present ways to do this that are not threatening to the parents, that doesn't erode their own self-esteem. There's a man named Dan Goleman who's written a book about this, and that publication is pretty well known in the literature. Again, it's listed at the end of this. But at one point, what we worried about mostly was IQ, intelligence quotient. And that's at the beginning, the slide about Big Bang Theory. That's what Sheldon had. He has apparently, the character is supposed to have an astronomical IQ. But we then began talking about emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, as you know probably, is what we used to call street smarts, although that term isn't used anymore. It's a different kind of intelligence. It has to do with interactions with other people. And it is a very, very important skill to have for successful life. The place where emotional learning and social learning, but where emotional learning begins, according to Goleman's research, and this research is old, but it is fundamental, it's foundational research, is at home. That the students begin learning their emotional intelligence at home. So we've defined social and emotional learning. We've talked about what teachers can do. Now we're talking about what else, how can you get help? What are some of the methods that we can use to get help with social and emotional learning for the children and adults that we teach? So the first thing is that you can share emotional strategies and activities used in school to make the families aware of social and emotional intelligence. Now that sounds like it's difficult, but there are small steps. There are small steps you can take. So there are some resources you can use at home, including booklets that are available online that you can send home with your students. But there are also things you can do. For example, you can create homework assignments that directly involve parents. You can create homework assignments that directly involve parents or communities. So an example of this might be, you can ask your students to ask parents about things like their cultural heritage or their work, where they work. And these things can help parents get more connected to what their students are doing in the classroom. I remember when my youngest daughter was maybe 5th grade, maybe 10 years old, and we lived in the mountains of North Carolina. We lived in the Appalachian Mountains. I worked at a college called 100-plus-year-old college called Lees McRae College, literally a mile above sea level. And by the way, the reason I'm not there is I found out I'm not a mountain woman, and the blizzards were not good for a woman who grew up in Florida, so my family and I moved back to Florida where I grew up. But up in the mountains, there was a whole culture that was different. In fact, some of it went back, some of the language went to Elizabethan English. And one of the wise teachers of my then 10-year-old daughter gave them an assignment to go into the community or go to family friends or go talk to the librarian at the public library and find out old stories. What are some of the stories, meaning the myths and legends, that were part of the community there? And we got back some amazing stories. The parents got more involved. Parents, that would be me, for example, in this example, got very much more involved in what the students were learning in the classroom because we sent them, the teachers sent them out into the community in a safe way to find out more about the community. And that bolstered social learning skills because they were talking to people. And these were young students. They were 10, they weren't adults. And they were taking those stories back to school and telling other people those stories. A long time ago, that before my time and your time, that was part of our normal culture. Now sometimes we have to build it into the learning environment. Lastly, as we all know, communication. How do you communicate with parents? Well, every teaching situation is different. There, in some cases, in some institutions, there are newsletters. A lot of schools have Facebook pages now. In fact, youngsters are not using the Facebook as much anymore as we older people are. And things like open houses. Some of the research that I read suggested simply something I hadn't thought of before. Because of the current schedules of parents, sometimes it's good to offer open houses on weekends or times when alternate times, different times. I know you're already working 1 million hours a week, but this kind of investment may help you in working with the students. So we've talked about the definitions, we've talked about what teachers can do. Here are 10 things that parents can do. And these 10 things are among the things that you or your school or you as a parent can help communicate. And these come based on the Castle research. They're my words, but there are better words and booklets in not only the one Castle site that I provide, but in a number of university sites and even social sites that are credible and reliable. The first, when a parent is talking to a student, their own student, focus on the value of learning. Don't just ask about geography and math or what did you learn today, which just about disables. It would disable me if somebody asked me what I learned today. But it might be easier to ask, what did you do today? Or what did your friends do today? And they may say nothing. And so you may have to push a little bit. The parent may have to push and say, did you have a good lunch today? That's usually a good subject. They'll probably say no, but it'll get them talking. And the parent will be able to listen to the way their child is viewing his or her educational experience. The conversation itself can help develop emotional learning. Now let me see if I can get a reaction, maybe not. Does this sound too unusual? Do you think it would be difficult to get parents to do this? Silence. All right, we will keep going. The second thing that parents can do and that you can help parents learn to do is to focus on creating an environment at home. Ernest Hemingway used to be an English teacher here, sorry. He wrote a good story called A Quiet, Well-Lit Place. Just having a spot, not relying on the student to find the spot, having a place at home where they not only do homework, but maybe just look at a book or talk with the parent. If you can associate that place with the students learning, that makes a difference. It's not in this study, but there is a psychological research study that showed it's kind of interesting. There are some sensual clues that help people learn. And the study was about students studying for final exams. And when students studied for final exams with, this is rather an expensive trick, you may not want to try this, but when they had they put a bouquet of roses on the desk where the students were studying, a bouquet of roses. And that was the experimental group. They had studied and they had a bouquet of roses. And then the control group just studied. They did not have a bouquet of roses. When the students took a test on the content covered, those students, and they were exposed to the scent of roses, those students who had studied with roses and then reintroduced to that scent when they took the test performed better on the test. There are sensual clues that we're not completely measuring all the way that help students remember better, in addition to the regular kinds of things like repetition or using mnemonic devices. But just being in the same place, in the same environment when you're learning, helps you learn more. So if you establish a place and they do their homework one night and they go back to that place, it'll be easier for them to accomplish their learning goals again in that same condition. It's a little strange, but it works. A third thing out of the 10 is to set up a bulletin board at home and put the dates on there. Especially for learners with special needs, visual clues sometimes help. And so if you have a test coming up, and the student has a test coming up, and the parents put that on the bulletin board and kind of point to it, not in a threatening way, and say, oh, remember, in a week you have that test. Remember, tomorrow we have the test. That can help students organize their thinking. Fourth, what else can teachers help parents do? This may seem obvious to you if you're an educator, but it wouldn't hurt to remind parents, especially if they have special needs students, because these children are taking a lot of time and they're trying to do their best, hopefully, to help the child, but it can be distracting. So sometimes the thing you can do is to remind parents to listen when their child talks about school. Stop, really listen, and pay attention to what they're saying. My background is partially in psychological counseling, and one of the things we learn to do, as you have probably already guessed as your educators, is to sometimes not have the feeling you have to fill up the silence. To just ask a question and then be still. And the student, or your child, depending on if you're the parent or the teacher here, will want to fill up that silence. And a lot of times will reveal a lot about the way they're feeling. Even if they say, I don't have anything to say, that's saying something about the way they feel about school. And the trick there is to use reflection, where you, without being annoying about it, reflect back what the student's saying. So today, you didn't have much to say about today. I guess maybe today was a boring day for you. And they'll say, yeah, it was boring. And then you could say, what was boring about it? Sometimes it doesn't help, but you can try. Fifth, help with homework. Don't do the homework, but it's okay for teachers to remind parents they can help with homework. The biggest thing in dealing with social and emotional learning, in helping with homework, is helping the child know where to start. They know they have homework to do, but they don't know exactly how to start doing it. They don't know to sit down. They don't know to maybe open a book. They just have to do it. By the way, I sometimes have graduate students that feel that way too. But helping with the homework doesn't mean doing the homework. It means helping them, helping the child, or the parent helping the child progress in the steps that are needed to do homework. Next, school meetings. You're talking to parents now. You're an educator trying to help a school or a class of parents, your students' parents, or your school that you're counseling with, to help parents get involved. School meetings. If possible, if you're the school, allow alternative times and places for parents to ask questions, and that these meetings are a priority for the parents. It's one of the most important things they can do. The seventh one is controversial. Some teachers don't like volunteers in the school. That's okay. But if you do, parents getting involved, even if they're a chaperone at a school dance, can help the parent get a better perspective on how their child is fitting in. All right, only 3 more. 8, go to school activities. It doesn't matter if it's back to school night or a basketball game. It doesn't even matter if the parent's child is on the basketball team. It matters if the parent goes with the child or goes to see the child in a school activity. What does this do? It builds a bridge. It builds a bridge between the school and home. It makes the child realize that they're both part of his or her world, that they're not distinctive places. The 9th one, when I first read about it, this was based on research. I was surprised and I was not sure it would work, but I've seen some of the blogs and some of the research about it, and apparently in some communities it's working. I don't know if they call it a social and emotional learning book club. The names I saw were a lot less technical and a lot more fun, like Parents Club. And in some communities, parents have created clubs, either actual physical clubs, but more often blogs and social media sites, where they can learn about encouraging children's social emotional learning. And there's some really cool ideas out there that parents have come up with, or that teachers have contributed to these blogs. Kind of a Pinterest thing. And just consider it, because it is working in some places. The last of the 10 things that are suggested for parents, there are many more, but I tried to pick the most palatable ones and ones that seem to make the most sense to me, is to encourage communication with the school. Even what you don't want to do is only communicate with the parents of your children, or if you're a parent, communicate with your teachers if something is wrong. One great thing I saw online in one of these parents' blog things is when the student comes home really excited about something, really happy about it, that the parents get back to the teachers and say, Alexandra came home from school today and she was really excited about how plants grow to seed, how seeds, I always get that backwards, how seeds grow to plants exercise. She really liked that. And the teacher can also suggest activities to support the skills that the children are learning at school, specifically the social skills. So if you are able to help the parents, maybe for one meal, not only a day, but maybe for one meal a week, to eat together. And what kinds of things do you do and talk about when you're having a meal together? Those kinds of activities can help both the parents and the teachers to work together to enhance social and emotional learning. I like this slide. one of the stories I heard about, and then I think I saw it on PBS, that you remember Mr. Rogers, most of us do. Mr. Rogers was a precursor to Sesame Street, and it was a television show during a time when there weren't a lot of television shows for children, about children's learning. And Mr. Rogers, as an adult, he was always an adult, sorry, as an older adult, after he had retired, had heard about 911, the 911 tragedy. Apparently, like all of us, he was devastated. He just couldn't imagine that so much evil existed in the world, according to the people that were talking to him. And he was asked to do a public service announcement. He was asked to do a public service announcement that went out to the general community, I think it was through public service broadcasting, about what people should do in very sad times. I can't imagine what I would have said, but he was Mr. Rogers, so he knew everything. And he said, and this quote is from that public broadcasting announcement, he said, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.'" And what this means to me is, oftentimes our students, particularly the ones that have learning disabilities, but I think all of our students are scared. They don't know what to do, and they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it. The words at the top of this slide, "The Art of Teaching," is the interesting name of one of the textbooks we use to teach in education courses. And it highlights the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that people that go into education don't go into it for the money, that they are a helping profession. So those of us that are teachers and that are educators, we are the helpers. We are the people who are helping. And the idea between social and emotional learning is using the resources that are available, learning what it is, teaching it in the classroom, teaching it in our communities to try to help people or youngsters who see scary things and don't know what to do. Now, what I'll do now is see, I think there's more than one slide, see if there are any